Death Stranding is a game of two halves, where one half has you slowly trudging from point to point delivering packages, while the other waxes philosophical about the nature of death and loneliness as you throw blood and urine grenades at giant tar monsters. To say that the latest from Hideo Kojima is somehow weirder than his usual output would be an understatement, but I think I still enjoyed it. The game is set during an apocalypse brought on by the titular Death Stranding, an event that caused the shadowy souls of the dead, referred to as beached things, or BTs, to roam the land of the living, killing people and consuming their corpses, essentially turning them into massive explosions called void-outs. In this wasteland, the remaining American cities exist in isolation, in colonies known as knots, while what remains of the government attempts to reconnect them to form the United Cities of America, and reclaim a little bit of the old world that was lost. Players control Sam Porter Bridges, a courier tasked with reconnecting the colonies to the government's infrastructure, a job that requires Sam to trek from coast to coast, dodging BTs, separatist terrorist organizations, and rainfall that ages anything it touches along the way. Death Stranding's story toys with some interesting ideas, and its message of making connections is an admirable one, but overall it comes off as ham-fisted and disappointingly predictable. Even compared to Kojima's previous stories, Death Stranding takes a needlessly long time to explain things that don't need explaining, while throwing out in-universe jargon without so much as an acknowledgement of how bizarre things are. Now, if you're like me and you love the more bizarre elements of Kojima's previous work, there are definitely bits and pieces that'll scratch that itch for you, but as a satisfying and compelling narrative, I'm not so sure it works. Thankfully, the performances of Death Stranding's cast are more than compelling enough to make up for the game's less than gripping plot. Troy Baker in particular steals every scene that he's in, though Norman Reedus and Mads Mikkelsen also bring a soft-spoken strength to their characters. There's also some really fantastic visuals accompanying these performances, with facial capture that matches the high quality of the vocal work, and some really striking cinematography. Meanwhile, the main area you'll be playing in is gorgeous to traverse. Really, the nature-reclaimed wasteland of the former US is massive, varied, and simply walking from point to point is a surprisingly relaxing experience. That relaxing quality is increased when the natural ambiance gives way to one of the game's various and numerous licensed tracks. But more than being simply relaxing, the sound design and the big empty landscapes hammer home this feeling of isolation and loneliness, which plays into the game's overall theme perfectly, as does its core gameplay loop. As mentioned earlier, you play as a courier who's trying to connect each of the stranded colonies to the remaining government's infrastructure, and this is accomplished manually by physically moving from location to location, all the way from coast to coast. Along the way, each of these colonies will have orders on offer, and you can build your relationship with them by fulfilling these deliveries to the best of your ability. Now that sounds pretty simple, because it is. You have limits to the amount of cargo you can carry on your back, as well as the weight of your overall load, and much of the challenge of Death Stranding's main gameplay loop comes from navigating its world without losing or damaging your cargo. Among the mundane hazards that dot the landscape, you have steep or rocky slopes that cause you to lose your footing, deep rivers that can sweep you off your feet, or high winds that can unbalance couriers with a taller stack of cargo. That's not to say you're helpless against the elements though. Beyond being able to brace yourself, assuming you have free hands, you have a pretty large selection of tools at your disposal. You begin with climbing anchors and ladders that help you descend sheer drops or bypass cliffs and rivers with ease, and your gear only grows from there. You soon gain access to massive bridge structures, vehicles, and zip lines, and using all of these tools to master Death Stranding's environment feels incredibly satisfying. However, there is only so much that one player can do on their own. The network that Sam is aiming to spread across the nation has a limited bandwidth, and each structure you build uses a chunk of that bandwidth. Thankfully, there are ways around this limitation. The most obvious solution is to increase the bandwidth, which you can do by bringing more locations online and ranking up your relationship with locations you've already visited. But it's the other solution that's probably Death Stranding's most fascinating element, the thing that makes it a so-called strand game. It's asynchronous multiplayer. Throughout your travels, you will never see a single other player, but you will see their signs, their tools, and their structures, which you're free to use and even work into your own structures, like I did with a massive mountain-spanning zipline track. There's this real sense of teamwork and community to be found while playing Death Stranding, even if the likes you receive in return for cooperation are negligible when compared to the same points you receive for completing jobs. Just knowing that you've helped someone out is rewarding in its own right, you know? It's also worth noting that the game doesn't simply bypass its core gameplay right out of the gate. You'll have to travel to new destinations at least once by yourself before community tools become available to you, which keeps you from ruining the fun of exploration and discovery for yourself, at least for a little while. So why bother delivering to locations more than once, I hear you say? Well, beyond having community assistance on offer, Death Stranding also provides a constant flow of upgraded tools and gear as long as you rank up your relationships with each point of contact. As well as incremental upgrades to your abilities such as carrying capacity and your ability to regain your balance, you'll also get better gear and cosmetics. We're talking like exoskeletons to boost your speed and jumping ability. Now, is the delivery aspect fun? I don't know that I'd say that it is, but it is definitely satisfying, and using your upgrades to make runs faster and more efficient only increases that satisfaction. It's kind of like a truck sim in this weird way. But like I said at the start of this review, Death Stranding is a game of two halves, and while I did quite enjoy the delivery aspect such as it is, its more combat and stealth oriented elements just didn't really click with me. Combat in Death Stranding is either against other humans or the boss type BTs, and you have plenty of tools at your disposal in both cases. Against humans you have a bevy of non-lethal weapons such as bowler guns, stun grenades, and a coil of rope that you can use to parry attacks and knock enemies out. When it comes to dealing with BTs, you gain special grenades and weapons that utilize Sam's blood while draining his health. Now in both cases, Death Stranding's combat is fun enough, and there are plenty of neat little advanced techniques you can use if you're willing to dig for them. For instance, you can throw unwanted cargo at human enemies to knock them out, or you can shoot normal bullets through the clouds left by blood grenades to avoid using actual blood-based guns, but ultimately, regardless of the cool details, the combat just feels out of place. In the middle of a delivery run, dealing with enemies is more annoying than anything, as it doesn't take much to damage your cargo, and stocking up on anti-BT weapons takes up precious cargo space. At the end of the day, I found planning my route and negotiating harsh terrain to be a far more enjoyable challenge than dealing with any sort of enemies, even if the BT fights are really cool looking. Overall, combat in general just doesn't vibe with the connection-heavy message the game's trying to push either. On that note, Death Stranding's stealth sections are also kind of underwhelming. These usually take the form of you sneaking past BTs using your shoulder-mounted sensor to avoid them, but sneaking through human camps is also pretty common. When it comes to BT sequences, avoiding them is laughably easy despite their invisible forms. Even if they do catch you, shaking loose and escaping them isn't super hard, and you're only required to go back and grab any dropped cargo after the BTs calm down. Human camps are a little bit more challenging as they can automatically sense you once you enter their area with cargo. Personally, I think that's kind of garbage, and it's not until halfway through the game that you actually get an ability to counteract this. Unfortunately, by that point, I found it easier to simply avoid or outrun these enemies entirely, which is a damn shame. But you know what? Even without engaging with the game's combat and stealth elements any more than you need to, Death Stranding delivers a decent amount of game, including plenty of optional delivery locations and even more replayable orders. And if you're the charitable type, you could easily spend hours just wandering around and building stuff to help other players out. Devoid of its wider narrative and the horrible apocalypse that it's set in, Death Stranding has the potential to be an incredibly chilled out time, and I can appreciate that. And with that, Death Stranding is good? Good. Yeah, let's go with good. For all its long-winded exposition and the interesting world building that goes to waste on Death Stranding's ham-fisted narrative, I've got to say that I really did have fun with its main gameplay loop. Picking up cargo, transporting it far away, and accumulating more deliveries along the way was genuinely satisfying, and the constant flow of new gear and tools made it feel really rewarding. Now, if this sort of gameplay loop doesn't sound like it's your thing, then I couldn't recommend this to you at all, but if, perchance, wandering the world and moving packages across a gorgeous landscape while helping out your fellow players sounds appealing to you, then by all means, check out Death Stranding and hurry past Chapter 3. You may just love it.